Hello again, welcome back everyone. Liquorhound here with you. Thank you for joining me once again for another spirit review video. And today we're going to be taking a look at a very special bottling coming to us from the Jim Beam Distillery and Fred Noe, the master distiller there. And it is the Booker's Rye. Now the Booker's Rye is going to be a very limited edition rye. It's known as the Big Time Batch Rye. And the reason I say it's going to be very difficult to find is because there wasn't very much of it released. The backstory on this whiskey goes back to Booker Noe himself back in 2003 when he decided he was going to really try and lay down a batch of rye whiskey. Now, previous to that, he really didn't like messing with rye. You know, he is a bourbon master distiller, so his hands are all about making bourbon, and he found rye to be a very tricky grain. And I think I know why that is because rye can be a very sticky grain to work with, especially in the milling process. It'll gum up machinery. It'll be a big pain to work with. And so regardless of all that, you know, he was going to try it. And in 2003, he did. He laid down about 100 barrels of this rye whiskey, put them in the center cut racks of his two best warehouses, those perfect floors where it's not too hot, not too cold. And that's where he left them. Now, unfortunately, again, in 2004, he passed. So this is one of those whiskeys that his last barrels that he laid down and finally came to maturity and where Fred Noe felt it was ready. So in the tradition of Bookers, as in all Bookers, you know, you kind of have that printed handwritten label on the Bookers. Well, this was handwritten by Fred Noe himself and then screen printed or whatever on the labels, all right? So just as his father did. Now, we talked about the Big Time Batch Proof, 136.2. That is a very high proof rye whiskey. Length of maturation in those barrels ended up being 13 years, 1 month, and 12 days old. And it is very unique in the sense that you don't see matured rye whiskeys at cask strength bottled anymore. You will see some matured rye coming out, like the Jeffersons did that 21 and 25 a couple years back, but they weren't cask strength. You'll get the Sazerac 18 from the BTAC, again, not cask strength. You do get the complexities, just not that impact of the high proof. And then you can go back to the Thomas H. Handy's or the Willett's single barrel rye. Now those are cask strength, but usually somewhere between 5 and 8 years of maturity. You don't really see that, you know, that heavy maturation time with cask strength. So this is the only game in town if you want that. And I think that's why they're asking the price that they were asking, $300, which seems pretty high when you look at everything else on the shelf, but this is not like everything else on the shelf. So I think they're pretty much spot on with what the demand is going to be, with the rarity of the product, with the historical value of Booker Noe making it himself. I think $300 is an okay price for this, all right? All right, other things to note, mash bill. They don't know the specific mash bill. Unfortunately, Booker Noe, I guess, didn't write it down or it got lost somewhere, but they don't know exactly what the percentage of rye is in this whiskey. They are saying that they think it's between 70 and 80. I tend to believe that it's closer to 70, simply because of the amount of bourbon feel to this rye. So that would tell me there's a good amount of corn in here, adding that sweetness, adding that brown sugar element to the rye characters. All right? All right, enough of that. Let's go ahead and get to the nosing and tasting at 136.2 proof. Booker Rye, Big Time Batch. On the nose, wow. It is sweet. Brown sugar. Heavy, almost burnt caramel. It's very dense. Very, very heavy. Wow. You also get a lot of like there's some red berries, some fruits in here, almost like a Booker's bourbon, almost. But the spices, that's what's very intense here on the nose. You get a lot of cinnamon, clove, a little bit of nutmeg, that allspice or a mulling spice characteristic as well, because there is some orange peel or dried orange peel element to the nose. A little bit of a red rope licorice feel with that. There's a little vanilla in underneath everything else, but it's very, very minute and very low. There is a little bit of a chocolate or a fudge element on the back end, that sweet brown sugar up front, kind of rolling on with the spices in the middle here on the nose. And then when you search a little deeper, then you start finding that chocolate. And of course there's a big oak note, but it's still sweet. It's still not overbearing or getting musty or anything like that. This is not over oaked on the nose. A little bit of a roasted nut quality to it. So very, very complex nose. All right, let's see if the palate is equally complex. And the one thing I will say is the color of this whiskey is amazing. Very deep mahogany color on it. And it's very oily in the glass. It's just, the legs are just long developing. Whew, okay. Whoa. Wow. That's intense. That first sip, I always tell everyone, don't judge the first sip because your palate's being acclimated. But wow, that is such a great first sip. Okay. Dense and intense. That's how I would sum up this whiskey right there in 2 words. Wow. It is, when it enters, it's very, very creamy and silky. And this thing is still just developing as I'm talking. It's very creamy and silky as it enters. Very oily. It's mouth coating. And as the flavors, as it goes down and you start to focus on what's happening in the palate here, you're just overwhelmed with all sorts of flavors. I'm getting that brown sugar, that caramel sweetness, a corn sweetness as well. Now, not necessarily like a corn grain. You're not getting the grain, but when I say that corn sweetness, I'm thinking like bourbon whiskey. That bourbon whiskey gives you that brown sugar, sweet caramel, and that's the sweetness from the corn grain. That is what's kind of happening here. The sweetness of the corn grain and the barrel, you know, good barrel maturation. But you're getting that sweetness happening right up front with that brown sugar caramel, and then you're just enveloped with the spices that just start coming on from that rye grain. Again, that cinnamon, that clove, not a whole lot of nutmeg on it, it's just a sprinkling of nutmeg. Oh, right up front. Those red fruits are in there, mixed in with some dark fruits, some cognac-like fruits in there, but they're, wow, they're so well integrated. And then that spice kind of comes on, big spice coming in there, just again, enveloping when it shows up as that cinnamon, clove, dried orange peels. And the dried orange peel element is pretty noticeable, and it kind of lasts for a very long time, even into the finish. But as it rolls over, then you start getting into the roasted nut character that you were finding on the nose. That's when it actually gets dark. It gets dark on the back end. What I mean by dark is it gets a little bitter elements, complexities, because you're getting dark chocolate. You're getting the roasted nuts, almost like a roasted coffee bean. And then you get that rich, dense, heavy oak on the back end as well. Again, not over oaked. It's just a big presence that is perfectly in tune with everything that's happening up front. All right, let's try that again. Yep. Brown sugar caramel, rich, heavy, sweet cinnamon swell, clove, that little nutmeg. Rolls over and you're getting that chocolatey fudge, more bitter, dark chocolate, roasted nuts definitely in there. The orange peel still kind of going throughout. That's that one fruit element that I would say is the most noticeable for me throughout. And then that oak, it just leans on that oak on the very back end. Oak resin, just perfect. Now, I will say that I'm glad that he bottled it now, because I think if he had bottled it another year from now, I think that oak resin would turn a little more tannic, because you do pick up a little bit of a dryness on the back end with all those bitter complexities and flavors on the back end. It does make it feel just a touch dry, but not bad. Not bad at all. Matter of fact, I enjoy this whiskey all the way from the beginning to the end. But I think if you had matured this longer, then you would have started seeing the tannins kind of rise and the oak kind of becoming a little too dominant. So I think he bottled it at the perfect time. Again, this is great whiskey. If you can find it, I highly recommend you buy it, even at $300. Like I said, historical value, the rarity of it, the experience of it, make it all worth that money. Let's go ahead and add a little water to it. And of course, I'm not adding just any water to this whiskey. So I've been using this old limestone water. And no, this is not a paid presentation. I did not receive anything free here. I purchased both bottles on my own. But I have been using this water for quite a while now. And I've actually been using it, that was about 10 drops. I've actually been using this water in my Scotch whiskeys as well. The thing that I've found about this whiskey is that the limestone and the minerality richness of it, it does help in a bourbon tasting. It does help in a Scotch whiskey tasting, simply because that limestone, that softness of that water, when you're adding water to a whiskey, it'll lower the viscosity, but it'll lower that proof, and the viscosity at the same time. But the water adds that creaminess, a little bit of a creamy mouthfeel to it. So even though you're losing the oils, that minerality of that water kind of covers that up, and it still makes it feel creamy, okay? And the other thing I've noticed is that it doesn't, if you add tap water to this, or you add a distilled water, it'll usually let the tannins pop a little more. The oak jumps out immediately. It'll feel a little bitter, a little not too great. But then when you let it sit for a while, those will kind of dissipate. Well, when you're using this water, I've noticed you don't have that problem nearly as much. It kind of comes in, it makes it soft, makes it creamy, and that's it. No tannin jumping out of the glass. Now, from what I understand, if you live in Kentucky, they actually bottle there at the source. So it says, let's see what this says, Hybrid Springs, all right? And so if you're in that area, you can actually, I guess, get this stuff in like 5-gallon jugs delivered to your home. It's just like Ozarka or anything else. But, here, I have to order it on Amazon or through the website. I actually went through Amazon. But anyway, let's see how it changes this great rye whiskey. On the nose, everything is just a little sweeter. The cinnamon spice is still there, but that's a little muted. Maybe a little more raisin, a little bit more of that dark fruit character kind of jumps with the water added. Almost, you can almost sense like a little bit of a, yeah, it's definitely a little more grape skin or a raisin element to the dark fruits in there. That's just that rye grain just adding crazy aromatics. Okay. Wow, that's nice. That took that spice down just a little bit. Took the viscosity down a little bit. But it did make it an overall a more rounded dram. It's not nearly as intense, not nearly as bold of an experience, but very nice, well-rounded whiskey. So if you're having someone over who's not used to cast strength whiskeys, add a little water to this. Don't be afraid. It's not going to change it, especially if you add good water. But wow, yeah, really, really nicely done on this rye. Me personally, I like the experience, the intensity of it, cast strength, so I probably wouldn't add any water to it myself. Unless maybe it was after dinner. This is a great, a library dram or an after dinner drink where you're going to sit there and relax with it and just take little sips and really kind of think it over. And I think this works well with water or without. But again, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, as always, leaving those great comments. I've actually been getting better at responding a little faster. So again, thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Everybody have a great evening, and cheers.